What is this book about?
So it's helping reinforce those things that make the individual able to stand apart from societal influence and yet have an influence on society.
Why do you think that's important?
It's important because societies are made up of individuals, and if all individuals just merely conform to social acceptance or social expectations, there's very, very little growth. It's incremental on even just a tiny scale. So what happens are, in cases like that, which you see in society now, is that it's only the outliers that tend to break away from society's conventions and expectations, who move society forward in giant leaps. So that's why it's important. So this is getting to the point where we realize that everybody has that creative engine and expression, and if they can break away from it and recognize first why an individual is important, then they can understand why all individuals are important and why their individual perspective is important. So it's a lot about realizing self in relation to others, valuing others based on that information, and then creating a society of people that actually value each other for their individual perspective and expression, rather than because you should do it this way because everybody else is doing it that way, which gets you a nice homogeneous mediocre group of people. And who wants that?
Why is creativity and perspective important?
Creativity and perspective are important because each individual has a unique perspective because of their eyes connected to their own personal brain, connected to their experiences and their sensory vehicle. So that means that each person is a parallel processing creative engine that is unique to every other person on the planet. So that individual perspective of each individual is something no one else sees. Now you may say, well, there's similarities. Well, there's only similarities insofar as that we have two eyes to perceive the world. But two people sitting next to each other will look at the same object and will see actually how the light reflects off, the incidence of light, color bleed on objects and so forth. What's obscuring one to the other is completely different than the other one. So two people standing next to each other, sitting next to each other, will still have a different perspective of that world view. So that creates an internal expression that's completely unique. And so when that's mixed with an individual's, again, unique physical interpretation of their world through their sensory vehicle, they then mesh that with their dreams, with their own personal drive and creative modality, how the brain internalizes and then processes the sensory data with memory, with the experiences of in the moment, forethought, prefrontal cortex development, on probability, on moving through iterations, creative iterations, and sometimes just through a insight that is an amalgam of all your senses and experiences. So that means when you are accurate with that and expressing that out to the world, what happens is you then give another person a new perspective they have never seen before. And so that is inspirational in just the fact that it is completely a different perspective. So similarities aside, we do not share the same internal view of the world. We don't. We can't. We don't share the same brain.
How do those individual perspectives, whether it's something small, just the way you see, that on the table is different, how does that lead up to changing society?
Because it comes down to the person valuing who and what they are. So that means that they honor what their sovereignty, they honor their viewpoint, they honor all of those things that make them unique. And then that's important because if you have a bunch of people like that, what happens is it makes it far less easy for somebody else to coerce, to channel them down into boxes and saying that because my ego and my charisma says it should be this way, you must conform. So when you start valuing yourself and understanding how that value is important to the rest of the world and the worldview on an individual and holistic basis, what happens is you are far more likely to resist somebody trying to come in and change your perspective for their own. You have a basis of understanding that is stronger and more capable. And then doing that, you have an awareness of what is actually going to impinge that. All of a sudden, you become aware of those things and those people who try to influence you against what your core is. And your core is your individual, unique perspective that no one else has, the creative engine you alone possess. That's different than others.
How can you tell when fear is productive or destructive to growth?
Fear is a pulling back. And fear is based on survival instincts. That's what it all comes down to. It all comes down to you protecting yourself. So we protect ourselves in a couple of different ways. One is physically, and our physical presence, that we want to continue our physical organism on to the next minute, next day, etc. So you have that end of it. So we have our base physicality. If we're confronted with somebody in the street who wants to take our life, that's a very obvious example of that. But then we have another one where it's our creative presence. If your fear is inhibitive, what happens is you are less likely to express yourself. You're more pulling inward, you're more protecting yourself. So like I said, in the physical realm, you can do that. That's quite obvious. But then when it comes to emotional conflict, or when it comes down to somebody trying to enforce their ego and their presence on you, if you don't have that iron core of understanding of who you are, then all of a sudden you'll be attacked. You'll feel more attacked, okay? And if you don't immediately sway to it, you'll get that instinct, because internally, each one of us has this little thing that cries out when something is going against our grain. You know, people that you'll immediately run into, that you'll just, because of their nature, because of their forcefulness, because of whatever else, it goes against your grain. And so that is basically part of you that's screaming out for, listen, I'm valuable. I have a presence that's as equal in this life as yours. Just because I don't shout it out and I'm not trying to control you, I'm not trying to impress upon you my presence as the sole one that you should take, doesn't give you the right to do that to me. The fear itself, like I said, is an inhibitory process to the creative opportunities present in the moment. So when you are afraid, you pull back, you look to defend yourself. And when you're defending, you're not creating. You're always trying to reinforce shields, you're reinforcing, putting up walls, you're reinforcing against the attacks that are coming in. We aren't free to create. We aren't free to explore. So somebody who is just allowed, like any child in nature, nature doesn't attack the child. So if you're looking at, we're not going into storms, we're talking just a child playing in the garden. All of a sudden the child is free to do anything it wants, and it has any pathway. So it's one of my things called the free child in nature. So your free child in nature you'll feel that inhibition, and you'll feel that you aren't able to be yourself under a lot of different conditions. It prevents you from being aware of all the opportunities that are available in the moment. So you're just like in any fight. What happens is people are tunnel visioned to the experience directly in front of them. Their sensory vehicle is still receiving all the information of the breeze against them, the sun warming their back, the sound of birds in the distance, all of that's there. But because we're tunnel visioned on that threat right in front of us, we are no longer aware of all the other things that are opportunities. The sound of a bird reflecting off of a tree or a wall or something else tells us, inherently it will tell us, that there's a wall there, that there is a tree there, or that it's completely open. That means I can escape to that exit. Instead of dealing with just this threat in front of us, if we're so focused on that threat in front of us, we lose the opportunity of that which is in the now, in what is being received through our senses all the time. So you'll find yourself under threat when fear is engaging and you start tunnel visioning, then you know that you're certainly not expressing yourself and you're certainly not understanding what's happening in the moment.
How is that different than creative fear? I think is when so this seems like it's coming from an external source, and that fear is shutting you down creatively.
Mm-hmm.
However, I know when I am avoiding going to draw, which I know is important for me,
Mm-hmm.
is a source of fear as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think.
But you look at what is that fear from? What does that fear stem from? So, and this is the thing where people, if they analyze themselves a little bit and their past, where these things started coming into play, you'll realize, hey, this isn't an inherent fear. The free child in nature has no fear of expressing itself, creatively or otherwise, until somebody comes by and says, ew, I don't like that. Or, ooh, that's no good. Or, you shouldn't do this. So you look back on where in your progression through life that occurred to you. Look back to the people, well-intentioned or not, that you then reinforced through, because fear is a self-reinforcing thing. You know, we'll talk down about ourselves because it engenders other people on the outside saying, oh no, you're really great, you're really great. So that's just a mechanism for trying to get sympathy from other people. It doesn't do anything for you as far as a creative expression. You're working more on an emotional level. So, like I said, the free child in nature doesn't care. The free child in nature just does whatever she wants freely, without inhibition and without care about what the outside world says about the work. So when you, as an artist, go through and you're doing your stuff and you have fear about that, what is the fear based on? Is the fear based on how other people are going to interpret it? Because if nobody else ever saw it but you, would you have that fear? Yes?
No, I would not have that fear.
Okay.
I've already gone through this in myself.
Okay, yeah.
I figured that out of myself through a lot of self-searching.
Yes.
How
yes.
would a person coming to drawing for the first time know that they were scared of the outcome versus they just don't like to draw?
Well, that's a different thing. That's a different question. Because a person who doesn't want to draw is different than somebody who inherently deeply wants to draw but then gets to it and then is kind of like not wanting to approach it. Because you look back at what you were doing at 12 years old, you look back at what you were doing at 10 years old, you look back at what you were doing all your life that's been sitting in the background, but you always keep returning to it. That's kind of how you know. And those expressions can take a lot of different form, because some people will do it in painting, some people will do it in music, some people will do it in creating cities, some people will do it in making the best darn type of rubber for a tire on a car. So it has a lot of different avenues, because there are things that we're just drawn to, and sometimes it's a genetic inheritance where we have that sway one way or the other too that we have to deal with. But you'll find that you've often been doing this most of your life. It's been in the background. It's just, even if it wasn't a full-on expression where everybody's seeing it all the time. Artists are always confronted with when they're first developing, and other people will just kind of look at them, pat them on the head and say, well, that's nice. And then if they keep persisting and doing it, then they start the questions, the almighty question, well, artists don't make a lot of money, or are you going to make any money with that? You know, what are you going to do? And that's the biggest thing that shuts people down right off the bat. So they trade off what they're going to do in life and what is meaningful, not only to them, but to everyone else who gets to see the artistic expression and be inspired by it and change their lives. We become accountants, or we become people who just repair liners on the inside of a car, you know, for the rest of our lives, till we are in the grave, you know, and then we get to sit there on our deathbed and say, well, I was the best car liner repairer of anyone. There's no expression of self in that. Sure, you may have done it in a crafty way, you may have put it in a certain way, but how does that expression come out to the world? How does that help change people? It might help them in the moment, you know. If you're good at what you do, there's nothing wrong with being good at what you do. But when you deny what's been suppressed in you, you have this angst about it. That's why people drink. That's why people do drugs. That's why they do all these other avenues, because they want that free creative release that they're not getting any other way. And they know because alcohol is accepted in our society, they go to that really quick. You see a lot of people doing that. And it's really surprising, because you'll see they all had fun. They all had, so much of a great time. And guess what? It lowers inhibitions. It lowers their reflex to societal expectations. And all of a sudden now they're happy and whatever else. That's a free child in nature. They're all trying to get back to that. So by that inherent desire to want to do it. So when you start getting up to it, we have lazy parts of us that it's like any other muscle. First of all, we have to meet our own expectations, even if we don't have to meet society's expectations. So that's one hurdle we have to come up against. If we're fully accepting that making errors is the process of growth, then go ahead and just err away, make as many as you can, express yourself to all its bad points and end points, and you'll find out what's right in that. You'll develop the muscle of doing the work, which is the most difficult thing for people to get through, is that persistence past their own expectations, past their own sense of failure, past their own sense of I'm just not doing well, that sort of thing. So, if you're always looking later on and you've given up and you've stopped at that point, but you're always looking, say, I wish I could have done that, I wish I could have that, get your ass back in there and do it. That's the thing.
Why do you call it the Tenets of Truth?
The Tenets of Truth, because they are guidelines, because with the way things are, there's a new agey type form of expression where it's counter-culture, counter-corporate environment, things like that. So people, it's the free movement, it's that sort of thing where people want to get away from that. They want to get out of religion, they want to get out of societal expectations in other ways, but they have nothing to replace it with. So a lot of them are just floating around, and I'm going to attach here, and I'm going to attach there, and I'm going to do this and do that. And while they're floating, they may feel good, and they may have, moments of, peace and things like that. But what is their expression? Has it fueled their expression? Has it given them enough of an honest understanding of who they are and why that's important to the rest of the world? Why that's important to the person next to you? The Tenets of Truth are actual guidelines reinforcing the individual, recognition of the individual, stabilization of the individual against external expectations and self, except for being the best person that you can be every day and working hard toward it. It is a guideline, a series of guidelines that actually is spelled out in concrete ways that are actionable, that people can always go back and refer to. It's not just platitudes that are out there, and it's not just nice little sayings here and there that people can, use as a momentary boost in their day. These are things that are actually based on empirical evidence. They're based on the functioning individual and creative expression that are consistent across humanity, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what society you are raised in. They're tenets. They go back to specific tenets, just like I said, and of truth. So they're of truth. They're of your specific truth to the individual. They're of your truth to each other. They're of truth to your expression.